Hello, my name is Shawn Simpson, and I am the Fortify DAST Product Manager at Micro Focus, responsible for WebInspect, WebInspect Enterprise, and Scan Central DAST. Today I'd like to show you WebInspect and how to set up a scan, review results, and what to expect when getting started with DAST scanning. We have several options when setting up a web application scan. The easiest and most straightforward is to start a basic scan. So we'll click on that, and this brings up our scan wizard. We have several options right off the bat, selecting things like crawl, how we audit our rendering engine, but most everything can be left as a default as we're learning how to use WebInspect. So today we're going to do a standard scan, and we're going to do it against our Zero web app, which is a demo application we have for showing off the features of WebInspect. And we select next. Here we get to authentication. We can always scan a site unauthenticated, but usually the most interesting findings are behind some sort of login page. So this is where we can set up things like proxy, network authentication, or forms authentication. For this one, we're going to do site authentication, and then we're going to select record to bring up our true client web macro recorder, which will allow us to record the process of logging into the site that then can be replayed when the scan is running. After True Client loads, we can see the web application that we went to, and it's in the browser here on the right. On the left, we can see the various steps we have as we're working through recording this macro. So for the Zero Bank demo app, we click sign in. We put in a username and a password. We want to stay signed in, and we click the sign in button. As we can see, every step we did, True Client recorded it all the way through. And once we've gotten to a point where we're confident we're logged in, we can click the stop button. And now we want to make sure our macro worked. So let's replay it. You can see that all of our steps got repeated. We're happy with it. And now True Client's going to ask us to select something on the page that is only going to be there once we're logged in. This is a confirmation step that tells True Client that it's logged in and that it can pass off to WebInspect to continue scanning. So something I think that's only in the logged in part is, let's do this cache accounts part. We also see something interesting down here, which is successfully created an automatic logout condition. So there's two parts about being logged in. One, we actually have to go through the process of logging in. But when we're doing security testing, some of the things we do can log us out. We may click on a logout button. We may send an attack that the server decides is malicious and will actually kick our session off. So we need to train WebInspect to know when we're logged in and when we're logged out. And when we're logged out, it'll actually replay this macro to reestablish that state. And we did it in an automated fashion here, so we are ready to go. I will save this, and we can just close True Client, and we can see we have our login macro is set up and ready for our next step. We're done with authentication, so we'll select next. And this is where we can tweak some of the coverage and thoroughness of how WebInspect is scanning. We'll leave everything here as default, especially on the crawl coverage. This is also where we can select our policy. A policy is how we control the audit. The audit is where we're actually sending attacks to the web application. And we're going to use our standard policy today, but as we can see, we have a lot of different policies. Some are targeted at specific technologies, mobile, aggressive SQL injection. Some are for compliance reasons, like DISA STIG. Some of them are targeted at very specific checks, like our OAST one, which can be used for testing against Log4Shell, for instance. But for today, we'll stay with our standard policy, which is always a good one to start with. Select next. Now this is where we see the details of what everything has been set up, and we also run a profiler here. This is going to send some requests to the server, make sure it's up and running, see what sort of user agents, any sort of last minute tweaks that we can automatically detect need to be made to the scan settings before we actually kick off that scan. Now that the profiler is completed, we can see some interesting things it's found. It noticed that there were some additional hosts that we might want to crawl to, but we're not going to do that right now. By default, WebInspect will only scan the host of the start URL supplied, but when doing the profiler, it may pick up there's some other interesting ones you may want to add, but that is up to you and what sort of testing you need to do. We can do things like import a previous scan if there's been any false positives that have been found and you want to apply those to the next scan. For this one though, we will enable our traffic monitor. This will capture all of the traffic and we'll save it. By default, it's not on because it does create a lot of data and increases the size of the scan file, but it's a useful thing for diagnostics and really understanding what WebInspect is doing. So we're going to include that on this one. We'll select next. We have a option to go ahead and save those settings. We don't need to do that now, and we can just click scan to get everything started. This WebInspect is starting up that scan. We can see our dashboard is coming up, and we'll start sending those first requests just in a moment. The scan begins to run. There's some things I'd like to call out. First, on the far left, we have our site tree. This is where we can see the structure of the website, see the folders and the URLs that WebInspect has found and is beginning to audit. Next, we have what we call our dashboard. This is where we can see things like how many different URLs need to be crawled, which ones need to be audited and are still in the queue waiting to be audited, what sort of findings we're having, so lows, mediums, highs, criticals, and then just a high-level statistics of what sort of findings and different probes and request types that WebInspect is sending. So during the scan, this is sort of that high-level view of everything that's going on. We can see how the scan is progressing, keep an eye on it. For this though, I'm pretty confident our scan of 0 will go well. So we'll leave this running in the background and I'll take you over to a scan that's already completed where we can actually start reviewing some results. While our scan is running, we can take a look at the scan I completed earlier to begin reviewing results. So again, we have our site tree. This is a great place to start. We can take a look at it, make sure we got good coverage of our site. Again, it's a folder view of it, so we can actually kind of drill down into any part that we're interested in. So this is a banking application. A lot of the content here is in the banking section. We can see the different flows, the different parameters that were attacked, as well as what actually we found when exploring this site. So we do decorate all of these findings. You can see here, for instance, this red circle with an exclamation point in it. That shows us that we had multiple findings and at least one of them was a critical. So once we click on it, our dashboard over here changes to a vulnerability view. And in this one, we can see we had multiple vulnerabilities found. The most critical one being a credit card number was found within the site. So that's obviously a big deal, exposure of private information. So we try to highlight that for you. And you can see where it actually falls into our findings tab here on the bottom. It's one of the privacy violations, and there are several of them on this site. Take a look at that dashboard view again. Some of the things to call out is we can see now that our scan is completed. All of the crawl sessions have been scanned. Our scan is in the completed status. We can see how long it took. Things like the policy that we used, how many hosts, sessions, all of those useful statistics about the scan to understand exactly what was done is available here. The various attack types we've sent. Probably the most interesting thing you'll have on there is though the findings. This is really the whole reason we're doing this scanning, is to find those vulnerabilities. So, and here we see we had 30 criticals. 22 of them were cross-site scripting. So let's take a closer look at one of those. It brings up a summary view of that finding. This was reflected cross-site scripting, exactly what that means, how was it executed, what sort of attack was used to do that, what is the implication, what is the risk to the users or the server from cross-site scripting, and as well how to fix it. How does a developer mitigate it, depending on different languages they're using? How would a security operations go about fixing it, or even QA? Then we also have some additional references on the bottom. But again, WebInspect is more than just for finding vulnerabilities. It can really give you that deep dive into what is there. So we can take a look at the individual request. This in red highlighted portion here, that's the actual attack we sent. We can go to the response that told us that this was vulnerable. We scroll down, we can see this right here, highlighted in red. This is the result that told us this server was vulnerable to this particular attack. We have things like more details about that individual attack, and we can even see the steps. So from the very first request WebInspect sent, this sequence of steps gets us all the way to that cross-site scripting attack that found the vulnerability. So additional information like this is really useful for developers in understanding how to replicate an issue, and then which makes it much easier to fix that issue. And then there's just some other very useful information. You can see all the different types of JavaScript that's available for that particular page, the links in, the links out, as well as host information, any sort of different cookies that may be used. It really gives you that, not only the security implications of the site, but also just a good overview of what sort of site it is you're scanning. With that, I'd like to thank you for spending some time looking at this demo of WebInspect, and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.